The first-hand accounts of Cheyenne warriors offer an extraordinary glimpse into the chaos and valor of Custer's final battle, forever etching the events of June 25, 1876, into history. The Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on the wide, sun-scorched plains of Montana, is often told from the perspective of military historians, but rarely do we hear from those who stood directly in the fray, the native warriors who fought to defend their land, families, and way of life. That day, the clash of rifles and the thunder of charging horses created a symphony of war. The cries of warriors, both in defiance and in triumph, still echo across the ages, shaping the way we understand that iconic moment. However, beyond the myths and legends, there are voices that speak to the raw reality of battle. Among them was Tu Mun, a respected Cheyenne war chief who led his people against the 7th Cavalry, standing fearless before an enemy that sought to crush their resistance. His leadership that day exemplified the courage and tactical wisdom that native leaders employed to defy the well-armed soldiers under Custer's command. Alongside Tu Mun was Dog, a seasoned Sioux war chief who fought alongside the legendary Crazy Horse. Dog's account reveals the close coordination between Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, who acted as a unified force despite facing what seemed to be overwhelming odds. His experience shows how deeply personal the battle was, fighting not just for victory, but for survival in the face of a military campaign designed to wipe out their way of life. White Shield, another Cheyenne warrior, provides a deeply human perspective on the battle. He recounts moments of fierce combat, but also moments of reflection, where warriors saw the faces of their enemies, understanding that they too were caught in the tides of history. White Shield fought with dignity, refusing to reduce the battle to a simple fight between good and evil. For him and others, this was a conflict between two nations, each trying to claim a future. Their stories take us back to the rugged hills and open plains, where the fate of the American West was contested in blood and fire. These accounts not only reshape how we view the Battle of Little Bighorn, but challenge the broader narrative of the so-called Indian Wars. By listening to the words of Tu Mun, Dog, and White Shield, we begin to grasp the complexity and humanity behind this historic clash. As we explore these warriors' perspectives, we are reminded that history is more than dates and names. It is lived experience. The bravery and sacrifice of native warriors at Little Bighorn remain a powerful testament to their enduring legacy. Before we delve into these vivid first-hand recollections, take a moment to support our growing community by liking and subscribing to stay connected with more stories that bring the past to life. Custer advanced along the ridge, moving toward the area where the monument now stands, unaware of the growing threat. From the base of Reno Hill, Cheyenne and Sioux warriors began to close in, encircling his forces. I led the Cheyenne warriors forward as we pressed toward Custer's position. His men took up defensive stances along the ridge, then descended into the valley, vanishing from our view. We pursued, pushing forward from the right side into the valley of the Little Bighorn. Custer, now aware of the danger, split his men into smaller groups along the ridge. Some dismounted, releasing their horses, leaving themselves vulnerable in the open. Among them were the soldiers mounted on gray horses, standing exposed on the hill, where the monument now rises. It was there that the Cheyenne and Sioux warriors surged like a tide, advancing toward Custer and his men, who clustered around Longhair, as we called him. They looked like ants from a distance, overwhelmed by the swarm of warriors. I led the Cheyenne up the ridge, determined to cut off the soldiers' escape. Rallying my brothers, I called out, "Come on, children, do not be afraid." The Cheyennes responded with fierce determination, shouting and firing their weapons as they charged forward. We broke through the soldiers' line, driving them back, and crossed the ridge, pressing onward into the heart of the battle, where the fate of Custer's forces would be sealed. Another group of warriors, including the Sioux, appeared over the ridge, joining the battle. I dismounted from my white horse and commanded my men to hold their position. We reloaded our rifles, took aim, and unleashed a volley at the nearest troop of soldiers. The first barrage was devastating, and many of the soldiers fell where they stood. With that, we advanced, steadily firing at the soldiers stationed along the ridge. Turning my horse, I looked back at my men and urged them to follow. I warned them, this may be the last day you ever see your chief. Around me, my Cheyenne brothers were falling, struck down in the chaos of battle, but we pressed forward. I led the charge toward the group of soldiers with gray horses positioned on the hilltop. The warriors followed close behind, shouting and firing as they closed the gap, but despite our efforts, I could not break through the soldiers' line. Seeing no way forward, I veered left and rode down the valley, exchanging fire with the soldiers as I went. I continued up the ridge on the left, where I encountered Black Bear, a fellow Cheyenne warrior. Together, we found a wounded soldier lying on the ground. I killed him and took his scalp as a sign of victory. As I rode on, I came across the bodies of 4 more dead soldiers. One of them wore a red flannel shirt, while the others had red stripes on their sleeves, marking them as men of rank. Each death brought us closer to victory, but the cost was high. Many of my brothers would not survive to see the end of this fight. I gathered their clothes and weapons, moving through the chaos of the battlefield where soldiers and warriors were now intertwined, nearly indistinguishable amidst the dust and blood. By the time I reached Custer's position on the ridge, nearly all the soldiers had already fallen. As we approached, we spotted one soldier attempting to flee toward the hills, but he didn't get far. We caught him quickly. The valley was thick with smoke, and the sound of bullets tearing through the air was constant, buzzing past us like bees. Gunfire filled my ears, so loud it was deafening, and amidst the noise, both warriors and soldiers were falling side by side. It was a sight I'll never forget: blood, smoke, and death all around us. At last, we saw Custer and the remainder of his men gathering on the hillside, preparing to make their final stand. The Sioux and Cheyenne warriors encircled them, charging in waves, firing as they advanced. The soldiers fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed. One by one, they fell until not a single man remained. When the last of them was down, we dismounted and took their weapons, then scalped them, claiming our victory over the 7th Cavalry. After the battle ended, we began to count the dead. We cut willow sticks and used them to tally the bodies scattered across the battlefield. The toll was staggering. We had to cut sticks 6 times as we found more bodies scattered across the ridge and valley. In the end, we counted 488 dead soldiers. As we were still counting the dead in the valley, General Terry and his men appeared in the distance. Seeing their approach, we knew it was time to retreat. We left the battlefield behind, knowing that we had won a great victory, but at a heavy cost. The memory of that day and the fallen would remain with us forever. The next day, we camped at Black Lodge River, moving constantly to avoid being chased. Before the battle, we had raided a soldier camp near Tongue River, stealing their horses and scattering the soldiers into the brush. We knew they would pursue us. At Powder River, the soldiers attacked our camp, destroying everything and stirring our anger. When the soldiers came for us on the day of the Custer battle, we were prepared to meet them head-on. They had been chasing us relentlessly, leaving us with no choice but to defend our people. The vast prairie, with its haunting emptiness, became the resting place for many, while the few remaining native warriors stood victorious on that sacred ground. The silent hills, witnesses to the bravery of 277 men who laid their lives on a blood-soaked battlefield, will forever echo the memory of a lone captain raising his sword against a wave of fierce warriors. For a brief moment, the June sun caught his figure, casting a fleeting glimmer before he fell to the earth, his body joining the blood-soaked land. This moment, now carved into the nation's memory, will echo through the generations. But before 1876, my life was different. I lived on the reservation near the Platte River, and we Oglalas spent our winters along the Tongue River. It was a time of relative peace, though tensions simmered. Then, on March 17th of that fateful year, a great battle erupted with General Crook, known to us as 3 Stars. Though we had our own conflicts with the Cheyenne, I found myself fighting alongside a small group of Sioux warriors near a Cheyenne camp under Chief Little Wolf's command. The clash was fierce and relentless, marking the beginning of a series of brutal confrontations. During the battle with Crook, our Oglala village was set up near Sundance Creek, not far from the Little Bighorn River. A tall bluff, its slopes cloaked in pine trees, stood nearby, marking a place some may have called Lone Teepee. It was there, beneath the shadow of that bluff, that the winds of war began to stir, and the path to the Battle of Little Bighorn was laid. What followed would forever change the course of our people's history, as warriors gathered and blood was spilled on sacred ground. I lost 7 horses in that battle, and the following night, we moved our camp to Lodgepole Creek. Some of our men went back to recover the lost horses, while one warrior stayed behind in a lone teepee. He was a Sans Arc, the brother of Turning Bear, who had been shot in the stomach during the skirmish with Crook's men. We had intended to engage Crook again, but with no crows nearby to guide us, we feared they might attack our village. Reluctantly, we decided to turn back. Our villages were spread too far apart to mount a proper pursuit, and though Crook had many allies with him, he eventually withdrew. In that moment, we knew we had won. 3 days after the battle with Crook, we moved our camp to the Little Bighorn. The Sioux were not eager for further conflict, and with our families by our side, our hopes were simple. We wanted to hunt buffalo and live in peace. But fate had other plans for us. A debate still lingers among the Sioux. Was it the second or third day after our arrival at the Little Bighorn that 7 Sioux scouts first spotted Custer's dust cloud on the horizon? Regardless, we knew something was coming, and the brief peace we sought was about to be shattered. Rather than warning the village of the approaching soldiers, the 7 Sioux scouts decided to circle around the troops and head southeast toward the agencies. One of the scouts, Fasthorn, had been spotted by Varnum earlier at Crow's Nest, but he returned to the village just before Reno's arrival. Among these scouts were Black Bear and Dirt Kettle, who quickly realized that Custer and his soldiers were advancing faster than anticipated. Believing they wouldn't be able to alert the village in time, they chose instead to watch the soldiers' movements closely and continue on their way toward the agencies, hoping to gather more intelligence on the situation. On June 25th, we Oglalas were camped further from the river, to the northwest of the Hunkpapa camp. The air felt still that morning, and no one expected a fight, especially since Crook had already withdrawn after the battle we had fought days earlier. There was a sense of calm among our people, and many believed that we might avoid further conflict. The Brules were absent that day, camped near the Oglala, keeping their distance from the main gathering. I had heard that there were about 20 Brule lodges nearby, led by Flying Chaser, also known as Wakuya Kenyon. Though not a chief of great renown, he was respected among his people. The Brules remained separate from the other camps, adding to the sense that the day would be uneventful. The largest camps belonged to the Hunkpapa and Blackfeet, who had around 600 to 700 lodges between them. They were the heart of the village, with their tents stretched out along the riverbank. The Minneconjou, though fewer in number, followed closely behind in terms of size and presence. The vast encampment was alive with daily activities, unaware that danger loomed just over the horizon. None of us knew what was coming. We believed the soldiers had been driven off with Crook's retreat, and we were focused on hunting and preparing for the future. But as the scouts monitored Custer's swift approach, the sense of security we had felt began to unravel. The signs of impending conflict were becoming clearer, even as we remained unaware that this would be the day that would forever mark our history. 30 or 40 Santee lodges were also there under Chief Inkpaluta, with just 2 Arapahoes present. In total, the village held around 1,800 lodges. Although I didn't see any white men among the Sioux, my camp housed a Canadian half-breed who spoke fluent English as well as Sioux. When Reno arrived, the Hunkpapa were quick to respond, most on foot, while I was delayed getting my horse. The Hunkpapa took a position in the timber, holding back the soldiers. I was stationed on a hill to the west of Reno's skirmish line, watching the warriors ready themselves to charge the soldiers in the timber. Many Sioux had yet to arrive, but those with horses were there, preparing for battle. As the charge began, Reno's soldiers fled the timber in two groups, riding up the river as fast as they could. We chased them, killing some of their scouts. I saw Benteen approaching, and I ceased my pursuit to return to the Hunkpapa camp. From our position, we saw more soldiers descending the big hill to the east, moving steadily toward the river. Custer's line stretched along the riverbank, and as he approached Medicine Tail Coulee, it became clear he intended to reach the lower end of our camp. The 5 soldiers found dead near the hill, at the cut bank, were likely at the front of his column, where they were met by warriors advancing from the river. By then, the village had been emptied as warriors gathered to confront the soldiers. Despite Custer's advancing forces, there was little fighting near the river. Only a few scattered shots echoed in the distance. Around 15 to 20 Sioux were stationed on the east side of the river, engaging in light skirmishes, while the soldiers returned fire sporadically. The gunfire was minimal overall, and I didn't hear any of Custer's men fire coordinated volleys. There was no sustained exchange of gunfire, just isolated shots back and forth. The location that Foley later identified as accurate, and it was indeed he who took his own life. As the battle unfolded, the warriors began to push the soldiers back, driving them toward the ridge and scattering them along Custer's line. What began as a disorganized skirmish near the river quickly escalated as more warriors arrived, and the soldiers, overwhelmed and fragmented, found themselves in a desperate retreat. The scattered remnants of Custer's line could do little to withstand the determined advance of the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. The ground where they had marched so confidently quickly became the site of their final stand. They stayed mounted, moving together, never breaking into companies. Crazy Horse led the charge that split the soldiers into 2 groups at Keogh. The horses stampeded toward the river in their desperation to escape. Custer's men never launched a charge along the ridge. They remained pinned at the ridge's end, where we later found their ammunition among the dead soldiers. As Custer's men made their last rush toward the river, those on foot sought shelter in the gully while the mounted soldiers tried to flee. South toward Finley, Line H shows the mounted soldiers making their escape, running toward the gully. Foley's account confirmed the presence of 28 dead in the gully. The battle with Custer didn't last much more than an hour, based on my memory. We didn't know we were facing Custer's forces. We didn't even know which soldiers they were. The Cheyennes were particularly brave in this fight, taking on a prominent role. The warriors, eager to claim scalps, grew weary before they could reach Custer's remaining group. I never knew that Bustard had been killed in the villages. He had been familiar with the Santee, who often accompanied the soldiers. Mitch Boyer, who may have been Bloody Knife, also fell in battle, and the Sioux recognized his body as one of their own. After defeating Pukoshi's soldiers, our attention shifted to the others. We surrounded them on the high bluffs, relentlessly firing as they desperately searched for water. Time wasn't on their side, but unfortunately, we didn't have enough of it to pursue Reno and Benteen before General Terry's reinforcements arrived. Without that additional help, we could have worn the soldiers down in just a few days. Even after June 26th, we still had plenty of ammunition and knew how to acquire more. The ammunition left behind by Custer's men was quickly gathered and used against the remaining soldiers. Many of Custer's men carried Winchesters, but among our people, there was a variety of guns collected from battles and trades over the years. Between 30 and 40 native warriors were killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn, with many more wounded, some of whom later succumbed to their injuries. Despite our victory, the losses we suffered reminded us of the price we paid in battle, as the memory of those who fought and fell lingered long after the guns had gone silent. After the battle, the tribes moved upriver toward the Bighorn Mountains, seeking refuge and safety in the rugged terrain. We stayed together as a united front until we reached Slim Buttes, where we ultimately parted ways. Sitting Bull led his people north toward Canada, seeking the freedom to live without the looming threat of encroachment. Meanwhile, I was part of the group that engaged in the skirmish at Slim Buttes. After our camp dispersed, the Oglalas, Sans Arcs, Minneconjou, and Cheyenne settled near Slim Buttes, while the Hunkpapas continued their journey. The Minneconjou tribe, who had been out hunting deer during the turmoil, suffered greatly in a massacre that unfolded there. Despite the chaos, no chiefs lost their lives in that tragic incident. However, a man who succumbed to a stomach wound was not a chief, but a Sans Arc and a relative of mine. To my knowledge, there were never two American horses involved in that confrontation. The man fought with the tenacity of a seasoned warrior, moving with the relentless spirit of someone determined to protect his people. His loss was deeply felt among us, a reminder of the harsh realities of our struggle for survival. As we settled into our new camps, the shadows of the past loomed large, and the stories of our fallen warriors echoed in our hearts. During our fight with Crook at Rosebud, the camp moved a short distance, about 4 miles down from Reno's headwaters. After spending 2 nights in that location, we relocated to the mouth of Reno Creek, where we set up for 5 or 6 days. During this time, 7 Arapahoes wandered into our camp. They were quickly captured, stripped of their weapons, horses, and some clothing, and there were plans to execute them. Many believed they were scouts sent from a nearby soldier encampment, and the atmosphere was tense. However, Black Wolf and Last Bull stepped forward to argue on behalf of the Arapahoes, urging the people to reconsider and hold off on any immediate actions. The captured Arapahoes were taken to Two Moons Lodge, but soon the Sioux surrounded the lodge, armed and demanding their deaths. Emotions ran high as women who had lost loved ones in previous conflicts pleaded tearfully for the Arapahoes' lives, invoking the memory of their own grief. In the midst of this turmoil, the majority of the people decided it would be best to wait for the arrival of Two Moons before making a final decision. A young man was dispatched to find him, and after a diligent search, Old Two Moons was located in one of the Sioux camps. Meanwhile, the captured Arapahoes were led out of the lodge, their fates hanging in the balance as the tension in the air grew thicker, reflecting the difficult choices that lay ahead for our people. When Old Two Moons arrived, accompanied by 5 other chiefs, they summoned the Arapahoes back inside the lodge. After a serious discussion, Old Two Moons declared that the chiefs had agreed to spare their lives, and their belongings were returned to them. Some of the elders suggested that the Arapahoes be taken to separate lodges and fed, ensuring they were cared for despite the tension. The Arapahoes were divided accordingly, but instructed to return to Two Moons Lodge afterward. The camp then moved once more, settling below the mouth of Reno Creek, where we stayed for just 1 night. The following day, Custer appeared, although it was not early in the morning. John Two Moons was about 3 miles away from the unfolding battle and bore witness to the events without directly participating. His account offers a broad perspective on what transpired that day. When he first spotted the soldiers, they were descending the steep hill to the east of the battlefield. The soldiers moved swiftly, their formations tightening as they advanced, while the Indians pursued them closely, preparing for a confrontation but not yet engaging. The tension was palpable, as both sides were aware that a significant clash was imminent. John Two Moons observed the scene unfold, capturing the essence of that moment before the chaos of battle erupted. This was Custer's command, and Two Moons did not witness Reno's battle, as it lay beyond his line of sight. After the soldiers turned onto the ridge, the Gray Horse Company halted near the current monument site, while the other companies advanced, stopping at intervals until they formed 4 lines, the last of which was positioned directly opposite our camp. Upon spotting the soldiers, young Two Moons, who was on a hillside closer to the river, dashed with others to catch their horses, eager to join the fray. Several charges were made, but serious fighting had not yet begun. The Indians swarmed up the gulch northeast of the soldiers, moving like ants emerging from a disturbed hill. The anticipation of battle filled the air, and warriors gathered, their spirits rising as they prepared to engage Custer's forces. The landscape transformed into a theater of tension, where every movement hinted at the impending conflict that would soon engulf us all. Yellow Nose made 2 bold dashes at the soldiers before retreating to urge his people, shouting, "Let us charge!" The 3rd company, positioned closer to the river, retreated slightly toward the 2nd company as the Indians pressed against the 3 companies on the ridge, which ran north-south, trying to force them toward the Gray Horse Company. Yellow Nose made a 3rd charge, but this time, The other warriors hesitated to follow. Meanwhile, the Indians began spreading further north, attempting to encircle the soldiers. On the fourth charge, Yellow Nose managed to rally all the warriors. They mounted their horses and surged forward in unison. This time, they overwhelmed the company furthest north, forcing them to flee down the ridge. As the Indians descended toward the Gray Horse Company, the soldiers opened fire in response, pushing the warriors back momentarily. Despite the resistance, several soldiers fell as the Indians reached the Gray Horse Company. The soldiers fired rapidly, driving the Indians out of sight, pushing them beyond the hill toward what would later become known as the Crow Agency. The clash intensified, with both sides feeling the weight of the struggle, marking the early moments of a fierce and chaotic battle that would shape the course of our history. The warriors shouted, "All dismount," and swiftly obeyed the command. As the soldiers began to retreat toward the hilltop, the Indians, now on foot, opened fire. Soon, they remounted their horses and charged forward again. In the chaos, the Gray Horse Company released their horses, and some bolted through the Indian ranks, racing toward the river in a desperate bid for escape. As the Indians reached the hill, they spotted two companies positioned down by the river. The soldiers, realizing their predicament, also released their horses, but it was too late. The Gray Horse Company was quickly overrun, wiped out near the hilltop, and vanished from view. One company attempted to take cover in a small gulch, but they too faced a grim fate, falling victim to the relentless advance of the warriors. Young Tumman witnessed the entire scene unfold, observing those who sought refuge by the creek meet the same tragic end. He realized that if the soldiers had held their ground together, the fight would have posed a far greater challenge for the Indians. The war cries of the warriors echoed through the air, striking fear into the soldiers' horses and making it increasingly difficult for them to manage their weapons effectively. The chaos of the battlefield intensified, each moment drawing closer to the inevitable conclusion of the clash that would forever alter the course of history. Had the soldiers' horses managed to cross a shallow part of the Little Horn River, they might have found a path to escape. Instead, they became trapped in a deep hole, floundering and swimming aimlessly. The Indian village was immense, brimming with young warriors eager for battle. Sioux warriors had gathered from as far as the Missouri River, and each soldier faced about 40 Indian fighters. Months earlier, warriors had been summoned from Red Cloud, Spotted Tail, Standing Rock, and beyond, forming a formidable coalition. That night, some of Reno's men attempted to sneak to the river for water, but in their quest, several of their horses were captured by the Indians while searching for a drink. The situation grew increasingly dire. The next morning, one soldier made a daring dash to the river under heavy fire, clutching a cup and a canteen. He filled both containers as bullets sprayed the water around him, yet miraculously returned to the safety of the breastworks unharmed. Later that day, news arrived that more soldiers were approaching, stirring a sense of urgency among the Indians. Some chose to leave Reno and move the camp, recognizing the shifting tides of battle. The air was thick with tension, as both sides prepared for what lay ahead, each aware that the outcome of this conflict would resonate far beyond the banks of the Little Horn. As they moved, the warriors could see Reno's men making their way toward the river. That morning, I had gone fishing in the Little Bighorn with Blackstone and my nephew, who was busy catching grasshoppers for bait. At that point, we hadn't heard anything about Reno's fight yet. Suddenly, a boy gathering grasshoppers returned, mentioning that an Indian wearing a war bonnet was nearby. Sensing trouble brewing, I mounted my horse and rode to a hilltop, where I heard faint gunfire and saw people running in panic. It was clear that the camp was under attack. Racing back, I found my mother waiting with my war horse in front of our lodge. I quickly bridled the horse, urgency surging through me, and asked, "Where's my war shirt?" She informed me that Bulletproof had taken it for the battle, adorning himself with a stuffed kingfisher tied to his head for good luck. As I prepared myself, I caught sight of the soldiers coming in 7 distinct groups. One group stood out clearly, their white horses making them easy to identify. I aimed for Custer's position, but noticed that other warriors were already converging on him. so I decided to approach from a different angle. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, the sound of gunfire mingling with the war cries of my people. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me, aware that the fate of many rested on our actions in the battle that was about to unfold. Nearby, Roan Bear, Bobtail Horse, and Mad Wolf cautioned, "Wait, there are too many soldiers. Keep shooting from a distance." As the Gray Horse Company drew closer to the river, the soldiers dismounted behind them, preparing for the confrontation. The Indians began firing, and the soldiers quickly returned fire, creating a chaotic exchange of gunshots. As the fight escalated, the Indians started to gather in greater numbers. Contrary Big Belly led a charge in front of the Gray Horse Company, and from our vantage point, we could see the soldiers' horses getting spooked, circling around the men, trying to control them. Despite our fierce attack, the soldiers fired rapidly, trying to maintain their formation. I spotted two warriors, Yellow Nose and my half-brother, charging toward a distant company to the southeast. Yellow Nose managed to seize a flag, boldly using it to count coup on a soldier. As he retreated, the soldiers' horses broke free and stampeded, creating further chaos among their ranks. The urgency of the moment surged through us as we recognized the soldiers' desperation. "The soldiers are coming!" echoed among the warriors, heightening the tension as we prepared for the next wave of confrontation. The battle was reaching a fever pitch, and every action would count in the unfolding struggle. By this time, 3 companies had lost their horses, while 4 still retained theirs. One dismounted company fought valiantly on foot, and I managed to circle around to their side. The fighting became intense and personal, with men resorting to their six-shooters as the Indians pressed up the hill. The Gray Horse Company, although on foot, valiantly fended off the Indians on one side, while another company struggled to regroup in front of them. Before long, 3 companies had been completely wiped out, and the Gray Horse Company, along with the remaining soldiers, was also overwhelmed. The Gray Horse Company held onto their horses until the end, but tragically, most of those horses were killed in the chaos. As the 4 companies came together, their formation crumbled against the overwhelming numbers of the warriors. Once the last soldier of the Gray Horse Company fell, the Indians swarmed the wounded, mercilessly finishing them off with hatchets, arrows, and knives. Amid the chaos, Old Bear and Kills in the Night, who were still alive in 1915, pursued a soldier on a sorrel horse. The atmosphere was charged with the cries of battle, the clashing of weapons, and the desperate struggle for survival, marking the culmination of a fierce encounter that would resonate in history. Old Bear fired twice, the second shot striking the soldier in the back. The soldier fell from his horse, lifeless. Custer was said to have been near the Gray Horse Company, closer to the river. I caught sight of the man believed to be Custer, stripped of his clothing, wearing a fringed buckskin shirt, high boots, and a red handkerchief around his neck. Lying near him was a 6-shooter and a saber, suggesting he must have died with the pistol still in his hand. The soldiers had their sabers drawn during the fight. The man, thought to be Custer, sported a long mustache but had no other facial hair. He bore marks pricked into his skin on his arms above the wrist, likely identifying him as Captain Thomas W. Custer. The Indians did not charge directly into the soldiers, but instead shot at them from behind the hills, using the terrain to their advantage. Amid the chaos, White Bull's son, Mad Wolf, also known as Limberbones, charged among the soldiers, bravely fighting but ultimately meeting his end during the battle. The scene was a stark reminder of the ferocity and desperation of the conflict, as both sides faced unimaginable losses in the struggle for survival. I hope this first-hand account offers you a fresh perspective on the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for more videos like this, as I aim to share more first-hand narratives from various battles. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you a great day ahead. I look forward to seeing you next time.